My name is Rachel Voss. This statement is being recorded at the request of Detective Maria Castellanos with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm providing this account voluntarily because I need there to be an official record of what happened at 1847 Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, Apartment 2B, between August 14th and October 29th of this year. I moved into that apartment on August 14th, 2025. The lease was signed on August 1st through a property management company called Westridge Residential. The monthly rent was $1,650, which included water and garbage but not electricity. The building is a 3-story walk-up constructed in 1964, 16 units total, predominantly single occupancy. My apartment was approximately 650 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, kitchenette, and a living area that faced the street. The layout is important. When you entered through the front door, you stepped directly into the living room. The bedroom was to the right, separated by a standard hollow core door. The bathroom was accessed through the bedroom. The kitchenette occupied the left side of the living room, separated by a breakfast bar, not a wall. There was one closet in the bedroom, approximately 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep. The walls throughout the unit were the original plaster over wood lath, painted white at some point in the last decade. I work remotely 4 days a week, occasionally going into the office on Fridays. This meant I spent the majority of my time inside that apartment. I'm mentioning this because it matters when trying to establish a timeline. The first incident I can verify occurred on August 29th at approximately 11:47 p.m. I was in bed, lights off, no television or music playing. I heard a sound coming from inside the wall directly behind my headboard. It wasn't knocking or scratching. It was a low mechanical hum, rhythmic, maybe one pulse every 2 seconds. It lasted for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I timed it on my phone because I thought it might be related to the building's plumbing or HVAC system. When it stopped abruptly. No fade out, just silence. I didn't report it. I assumed it was something structural. The sound returned on September 2nd, same location, same time of night, 11:43 p.m. this time. Duration was longer, approximately 9 minutes. I recorded this one on my phone. The audio quality isn't great because of the wall interference, but you can hear it clearly enough. I've provided that recording to the detective. On September 5th, I contacted Westridge Residential to report a possible mechanical issue. I spoke with a property manager named Joel Hendricks. He said he'd send someone to investigate. A maintenance worker, I didn't get his name, came by on September 9th around 2 p.m. He spent maybe 20 minutes in the apartment, checked behind the bed, looked at the HVAC vents, said he couldn't find anything unusual. He told me old buildings make noises and that I'd probably get used to it. I told him the sound was clearly mechanical, not settling or wind. He shrugged and left. The sound continued. September 8th, September 12th, September 16th. Always between 11:40 p.m. and midnight. Always from the same spot in the wall. The duration varied, anywhere from 3 minutes to almost 15. On September 18th, I decided to check the wall myself. I'm not a contractor, but I know enough to recognize that the wall behind my bed was shared with apartment 2C, which according to the building directory was occupied by a tenant named L. Monroe. I'd never seen or heard anyone in that unit. No footsteps, no voices, no TV noise, nothing. I knocked on the door to 2C at around 6:30 p.m. that evening. No answer. I tried again the next morning at 8 a.m. Still no answer. I left a note on the door asking the tenant to contact me about a possible shared wall issue. The note was gone the next day, but I never received any contact. On September 23rd, the sound changed. It was no longer just the hum. There was a secondary noise layered underneath it, almost like a recording of someone speaking, but too distorted to make out words. It sounded like speech played backward or slowed down significantly. This lasted for 11 minutes starting at 11:52 p.m. I called the non-emergency police line that night. The dispatcher took my information, but explained that without evidence of an actual crime or immediate threat, there wasn't much they could do. She suggested I continue documenting everything and contact my landlord again. I sent an email to Joel Hendricks at Westridge Residential on September 24th at 9:14 a.m. I outlined every incident, included timestamps, and attached the audio recording from my phone. I specifically asked whether apartment 2C was occupied and if the management company could investigate the shared wall. Joel responded 3 days later on September 27th. His email said that apartment 2C was currently leased, but that the tenant traveled frequently for work. He said he'd schedule another maintenance visit. No one ever came. On October 1st, I was lying in bed at around 11:30 p.m., waiting to see if the sound would occur again. It did, at 11:46 p.m. But this time, I heard something else. Footsteps. They were coming from inside 2C, directly on the other side of the wall. Slow, deliberate steps. Maybe one step every 3 or 4 seconds. They moved from what would have been the far end of the apartment toward the shared wall, then stopped. The humming sound started 30 seconds later. I got out of bed and put my ear against the wall. I could feel a faint vibration. The footsteps resumed, moving away from the wall, then returning. This pattern repeated 4 times over the next 8 minutes. When the humming stopped, the footsteps stopped as well. I tried knocking on the wall. 3 firm knocks. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. At 12:17 a.m., I heard the door to apartment 2C open and close. I looked through my peephole but couldn't see anyone in the hallway. I opened my door and looked out. The hallway was empty. I walked to the door of 2C and knocked. No response. I tried the handle. It was locked. On October 4th, I filed a formal complaint with Westridge Residential, sent via certified mail. I kept a copy for my records. In the complaint, I stated that I believed someone in 2C was engaging in activity that was disturbing my ability to use my apartment peacefully, and I requested that the management company either investigate or allow me to break my lease without penalty. I received a response on October 9th. Joel Hendricks called me directly. He sounded irritated. He told me that the tenant in 2C, whose name he still would not disclose, had lived there for over 6 years without any complaints. He said that I was the first person to report any issues, and that they had no legal grounds to enter 2C without the tenant's permission or evidence of lease violations. He suggested I consider whether the sounds might be coming from a different source. I asked him point blank if he'd spoken to the tenant in 2C. He said he'd left messages but hadn't received a return call. I asked when the last time was that anyone from Westridge had physically seen the tenant. He said he didn't have that information readily available. On October 12th, the sounds stopped entirely. No humming, no distorted speech, nothing. I thought maybe whatever had been happening was over. On October 16th, I came home from a client meeting at around 7:45 p.m. When I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, I immediately noticed something was off. Nothing was missing or moved, but there was a smell I didn't recognize, not strong, but distinct. Chemical, maybe cleaning solution or something electronic that had overheated. I checked every room, everything appeared normal. I checked the locks on the windows, secure. I checked the front door lock, no signs of tampering. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. At 11:51 p.m. that night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom closet door opening. I sleep with my bedroom door closed and locked from the inside, a habit I'd developed after the wall incident started. The closet door in my bedroom doesn't latch properly. It swings open on its own sometimes if it's not pushed completely shut. But I know I'd closed it before going to bed because I'd done it deliberately, the same way I'd been doing it every night for weeks. I turned on the lamp on my nightstand. The closet door was open approximately 8 inches. I got out of bed and looked inside. My clothes were exactly where I'd left them. Nothing was disturbed. I pushed the door shut firmly and went back to bed. At 12:03 a.m., the door opened again. I watched it happen. It didn't swing open like it normally did when the latch failed. It opened slowly, evenly, as if someone was pulling it from the inside. I didn't move. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard and stared at that open closet for the next 4 hours. Nothing else happened. At around 4:15 a.m., I got up, grabbed my phone and my keys and left the apartment. I sat in my car in the parking lot until sunrise. On October 17th, I went back inside during daylight. I pulled everything out of the bedroom closet, every piece of clothing, every box, every shoe. I wanted to see the back wall clearly. The closet was empty except for the metal hanging rod and the wooden shelf above it. The back wall of the closet was the shared wall with apartment 2C. I knocked on it. It sounded hollow in some places, solid in others. I noticed something I hadn't seen before because it had been hidden behind a stack of storage boxes. There was a seam in the plaster, a vertical line running from the floor to about 3 feet up, then a horizontal line across, then back down. It formed a rectangular outline, approximately 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. It looked like a panel that had been plastered over. I took photographs of it from multiple angles. I measured it. The panel, if that's what it was, sat about 1 foot from the left edge of the closet and about 6 inches from the floor. I pressed against it gently. There was a slight give, like the plaster was thinner there or there was a gap behind it. I didn't do anything else that day. I put my clothes back in the closet, closed the door, and left the apartment. I stayed at a friend's place that night. On October 19th, I came back to the apartment at around 10 baud a.m. with a utility knife. I'm aware this constitutes damage to the rental property. I'm disclosing this because it's relevant to the case, and because I don't believe I had any other option at that point. I scored along the seam of the rectangular outline in the plaster, then used the back of a hammer to tap gently around the edges. The plaster cracked cleanly along the lines I'd cut. I pulled away chunks of it carefully until I'd exposed what was underneath. It was a panel of wood, painted the same white as the plaster, held in place by 4 Phillips head screws, one in each corner. I removed the screws. The panel came away easily. Behind it was a hollow space, roughly 2 feet wide, 3 feet tall, and about 8 inches deep. It wasn't part of the original closet. Someone had built a false section into the back wall, a hidden compartment built into the shared wall between my apartment and 2C. Inside the compartment, there were 3 items. The first was a small digital recorder, the kind used for interviews or lectures. It was silver, about the size of a deck of cards, with a black screen and several buttons. It was connected to a power source, a cable running from the recorder through a small hole drilled in the bottom of the compartment, presumably into the wall cavity where it connected to an outlet somewhere. The second item was a notebook, spiral-bound, about 70 pages. The handwriting inside was small, neat, all in black ink. The third item was a stack of photographs, maybe 30 or 40 of them, held together with a rubber band. I didn't touch anything immediately. I took photographs of the compartment with my phone, multiple angles, making sure the recorder and the notebook and the photos were all visible. Then I took the recorder out. It was warm to the touch, meaning it had been recently active or was still active. There was a small LED light on the side that was glowing red. I pressed the button labeled "Stop." The light turned off. I pressed play. What I heard was my own voice, a conversation I'd had on the phone 3 days earlier with my mother about weekend plans. The quality was clear, no distortion. It had been recorded from inside my apartment. I stopped the playback. I scrolled through the files on the recorder. There were dozens of them, all labeled with dates ranging from August 17th to October 18th. I didn't listen to all of them. I listened to 3. All of them were recordings of me, conversations, phone calls. One of them was just me talking to myself while I was cooking. I put the recorder down and picked up the notebook. The first page had a date written at the top, June 3rd, 2019. Below that was a log entry, time-stamped 11:34 p.m. It read, "Subject entered bedroom. Lights off by 11:41 p.m. No activity until 6:52 a.m." I flipped through the pages. Every entry followed the same format. Dates, times, observations. They were surveillance logs. Details about when someone entered rooms, when lights were turned on and off, when they left the apartment, when they returned. The entries went on for pages, dated consistently every few days, sometimes daily, spanning from June 2019 to March 2023. Then there was a gap. No entries between March 2023 and August 15th, 2025. August 15th was the day after I moved in. The entry for August 15th read, "New subject arrived. Female, late 20s, lives alone. Observed unpacking until approximately 10:20 p.m. The logs continued from there. August 17th, August 20th, August 24th. The last entry was dated October 14th. I put the notebook down and looked at the photographs. I'm not going to describe most of them in detail because I've turned them over to the police, and I don't want to compromise the investigation. What I will say is that they were surveillance photographs taken inside an apartment, my apartment. Some were taken from angles that suggested the camera had been positioned inside the walls or ceiling. Others appeared to have been taken through the peephole of the front door, or possibly through a gap somewhere I hadn't noticed. Several of the photos showed me asleep in my bed. I called 911 at 10:47 a.m. 2 officers arrived at 11:03 a.m., Officer J. Ramirez and Officer D. Park, according to the report I was given later. I showed them the compartment, the recorder, the notebook, and the photographs. Officer Park secured the items as evidence. Officer Ramirez took my statement in the living room, while Officer Park went next door to apartment 2C. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, identified himself as police. Still no answer. Building management was contacted. Joel Hendricks arrived at approximately 12:15 p.m. with a master key. The officers entered apartment 2C at 12:22 p.m. I wasn't allowed inside, but I watched from my doorway. The apartment was furnished, but it didn't look lived in. There was a couch, a small table, a bed in the bedroom, but no personal items. No photographs, no mail, no dishes in the sink. The officers spent about 20 minutes inside. When they came out, Officer Ramirez told me that the apartment appeared to be unoccupied and that there was no evidence anyone had been staying there recently. He said they'd found something in the bedroom closet that they needed to process, and that I shouldn't go back into my apartment until they'd finished their investigation. I asked what they'd found. He said he couldn't disclose that yet. I stayed in the hallway for the next 3 hours while officers and a crime scene technician went in and out of both apartments. At around 3:40 p.m., Detective Castellanos arrived. She's the one who's handling the case now. She told me that behind the closet in apartment 2C, they'd found another compartment, similar to the one in my apartment. Inside that compartment, there was more recording equipment, a camera system with a small monitor, and additional notebooks. She asked me if I knew anyone named L. Monroe. I said no. She asked me if I'd ever seen anyone entering or leaving apartment 2C. I said no, only heard footsteps that one time. She asked me if I'd received any threats or noticed anyone following me prior to moving into the building. I said no. She told me that according to Westridge Residential's records, apartment 2C had been leased to someone named Leon Monroe since April of 2019. Rent was paid automatically through a bank account every month, always on time, no late payments. The lease had been renewed twice, most recently in April of 2025. She told me that there was no Leon Monroe matching any identifying information in their system. No driver's license, no employment records, no social media presence. The bank account used for rent payments was opened in 2019 with a deposit of $40,000 cash. Since then, the only activity on the account was the monthly rent withdrawal. She told me that they'd attempted to contact the phone number on the lease application. It was disconnected. She told me that the previous tenant in my apartment, apartment 2B, had lived there from January 2019 until July 2025. Her name was Emily Strand. She moved out at the end of her lease, no issues reported. Detective Castellanos said they were trying to locate her to ask if she'd experienced anything similar. I asked if they knew who'd been recording me. She said they were investigating. I asked if it was safe for me to stay in the apartment. She said they'd removed all the equipment they'd found, but she couldn't guarantee there wasn't more. She suggested I stay somewhere else until they'd finished processing the scene. I asked when I'd be able to go back in. She said she'd let me know. That was 6 days ago. I haven't been back to the apartment. I've been staying with a friend in Beaverton. Detective Castellanos called me yesterday and asked me to come in to provide this statement. She told me they'd finished processing both units and that I was cleared to return if I wanted to, but that the investigation was ongoing. She also told me something else. They tracked down Emily Strand, the previous tenant. She's alive, living in Seattle now. When the detective contacted her and explained the situation, Emily said she'd always felt like someone was watching her when she lived in that apartment, but assumed she was being paranoid. She said there were multiple times she came home and felt like someone had been inside while she was gone, but nothing was ever missing, so she never reported it. Emily moved out in July because she said the apartment made her uncomfortable, but she never knew why. The detective asked her if she'd ever heard sounds coming from the walls. Emily said yes, all the time, especially late at night. Detective Castellanos told me that they'd examined the lease records for apartment 2C going back to 2015. There's no indication anyone actually lived there. Every lease since 2015 has been under a different name, always paid in cash or through an untraceable account, always renewed, never any maintenance requests, never any complaints. She said whoever was using that apartment had been surveilling tenants in 2B for at least a decade, possibly longer. She said they're still trying to determine who Leon Monroe actually is, or if that person even exists. I asked her if I was in danger. She said she didn't know. I'm recording this statement because I don't know what else to do. I don't feel safe going back to that building, but I also can't afford to break my lease and lose my security deposit. Westridge Residential has refused to let me out of the lease early without penalty, despite everything that's happened. The last thing I'll say is this. 2 nights ago, I was staying at my friend's apartment in Beaverton, about 40 minutes from Southeast Hawthorne. I was sitting in her living room at around 11:30 p.m. when I got a notification on my phone. It was an email, sent from an address I didn't recognize, no subject line. The body of the email contained a single sentence, "You shouldn't have opened the wall." I forwarded it to Detective Castellanos immediately. She said they're trying to trace it, but the email was sent through an encrypted service that makes identification difficult. I don't know if whoever sent that email is the same person who was recording me. I don't know if they know where I'm staying now. I don't know what they want. But I do know one thing. They're still out there, and they're still watching. End of statement. Case status: open investigation, evidence collected, digital recorder, 2 notebooks, 47 photographs, camera equipment, monitor system, suspect identification, ongoing, subject status, Rachel Voss, current location undisclosed for safety, previous tenant status, Emily Strand, contacted, cooperating with investigation. Note from Detective M. Castellanos: anyone with information regarding Leon Monroe, surveillance activity at 1847 SE Hawthorne Blvd, or similar experiences in Portland area rental properties, is urged to contact the Portland Police Bureau tip line. This case remains unsolved.